What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the CUPPS Analytics YouTube channel. My name is Alex CUPPS, and I'm back this week to give you guys my main data-driven takeaways from week 13 of this season. This week had a lot of production from players that we haven't seen a ton of this year, some new names to some of our charts, so that's what I'm going to focus on mainly in this video, are the names of these players that could contribute potentially for our teams down the stretch this year. I'll also touch on some of the big names as well, but at this point in the season, we know who most of these guys are and what we can expect from them when we put them in our lineups. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Week 13 of the CUPPS Analytics Data-Driven Takeaways starts right now. Let's go. All right, so we'll start off here with our first chart, the top risers and fallers at the running back position in week 13. And if you haven't seen this chart before, we have 5 different columns here. The first being the player name, the team they're on, their pre-week 13 fantasy points per game, and their current fantasy points per game. So this takes into account all of the weeks 1 through 12, as well as week 13, and it sorts them by the biggest risers in fantasy points per game, given those differences. We also have the fantasy point per game position ranking over here as well. And then same thing would go for the fallers, except it would be negative differences between their pre-week 13 fantasy points per game and post-week 13. So a couple of names I wanted to touch on here. Malik Davis is looking like he's gonna be the standalone RB2 in Dallas down the stretch this year. We were hoping to see Jayden Blue, the rookie, get more involved as the year went on, but it appears that the coaching staff does not have any interest in getting him on the field. He's been a healthy scratch over the past couple months. And with Miles Sanders injured, Malik Davis has pretty much taken over that RB2 role. So he doesn't offer a ton of standalone value, but probably worth a pickup if you have room on your rosters in case we do see a Jahmyr Williams injury down the stretch. Next guy I want to talk about would be Devin Neal over in New Orleans, who we see take on his first big workload with Alvin Kamara sidelined this week. And Devin Neal pretty much had the entire workload out of this Saints backfield. He had 14 carries. The next closest running back was Evan Hull with 5 carries. He also had 3 catches out of the backfield for 22 yards as well. So if Alvin Kamara remains out, then I do think we can be plugging in Devin Neal down the stretch as a mid-range RB3, maybe a little higher RB3. Obviously, the Saints offense is nothing super special, and they're not going to be scoring a lot of points every week, so it's hard to trust him to fall into the end zone. But at the very least, we have a reliable role in this Saints backfield for Devin Neal. We also have Chuba Hubbard here as well. He raises his fantasy points per game up after week 13 after a big game. He was still outcarried by Rico Dowdle 18-17, but he definitely found more success on the ground this week. And it begs the question that we might be seeing more of a 50-50 split or a riding of the hot hand in this Carolina backfield, which makes it a little harder to trust Rico Dowdle as a plug-and-play starter every week going forward. I still don't think I'd want to be picking up Chuba Hubbard and plugging him into my lineup. I really just think this is more of a thorn in the side for Rico Dowdle at this point. We also have Blake Corum here with his first big game of the year. He only has 7 carries to Kyren Williams' 14, but he outcarries him. 81 yards for Blake Corum, 73 yards for Kyren Williams this week. So super efficient week for Blake Corum, but I still think we're gonna have a hard time obviously plugging him in as a reliable starter, but I do see him as probably the most valuable standalone handcuff in all of fantasy right now. And the funny part is he's only rostered in 23% of sleeper redraft leagues right now. So he would be a priority guy for me to have on all of my competing teams going into the playoffs right now. If we see a Kyren injury and he's held out a week or two, Blake Corum would jump right in as a mid-range RB1. Also wanted to note Kyle Monangai here as well. He just continues to get it done week after week. We're seeing a little bit of a changing of the guard of that backfield in Chicago. Obviously this week, both Monangai and Swift get their workloads. The Bears were able to run the ball all over the Eagles this week, but I think you could trust both Monangai and Swift at this point as weekly starters in that RB2 range. Last night, we also saw RJ Harvey have a big game. 2 touchdowns against the Washington Commanders. He had about 68% of the rushing carries out of that Broncos backfield last night, and he also got 100% of the red zone carries. So Harvey's role looks to be super good going forward. He also has a pretty safe floor given the receiving work that he gets in this offense. So I'm viewing Harvey as a back-end RB1 down the stretch. And then jumping down here to the RB fallers, only name I wanted to touch on here would be Rachaad White, who we're seeing pretty much go to 0 after Bucky Irving returned. You could also say the same thing for Sean Tucker as well. Both Sean Tucker and Rachaad White had 2 carries. Sean Tucker went for 0 yards, while Rachaad White went for 7. Meanwhile, Bucky Irving, who was apparently going to be on on a snap count this week, gets 17 carries for 61 yards and a touchdown. So it's looking like we're right back to where we were at the beginning of the season, where Bucky was projected as the workhorse back in this offense, and I think that's what we're going to see down the stretch as well. All right, and if you remember at the beginning when I said there was some unorthodox guys scoring a bunch of points this week, this is where we're going to get into that. The biggest scores at the wide receiver position, biggest risers over the past week. We see some new names here, and we can start off with the top riser, Devaughn Vele. And if you're not familiar with Devaughn Vele, he was a rookie last year. I believe he was like 26 years old, so he's a super old rookie. He was previously in Denver with Sean Payton, actually had some success over there, but he was traded to the Saints this offseason, and he's pretty much done nothing so far this year, but we do see him explode yesterday for a big game. He goes 8 for 93 and a touchdown, leading the team in targets and receiving yards. And while this was exciting to see him finally get involved in the Saints offense, I definitely don't have high hopes for Vele down the stretch this year. Like I mentioned before, this Saints offense isn't great, and there aren't a ton of points to go around in the first place, given the fact that Vele is the wide receiver 2 on this team behind Olave. Juwan Johnson continues to get involved at tight end, and you always have that Taysom Hill wild card as well. Vele is someone that I'm not going to be picking up off waivers or have much interest plugging into my lineup. Next guy down, we see Dontayvion Wicks over in Green Bay. He has a massive game as well in week 13, leads the team in yards with 94, 7 targets, only behind Christian Watson, who had 10. And this Green Bay Packers wide receiver carousel just continues to change every single week. Romeo Doubs, who's usually a pretty reliable target for Jordan Love, was a bit of a non-factor in this game. And while it's been good to see Dontayvion Wicks get involved over the past couple weeks, we do have Jayden Reed returning as well in the next week or two. And I just find it really hard to trust any of these guys consistently week by week in the Packers offense. So again, another guy I'm not super interested in plugging into my lineup or picking up off waivers. I would not say the same for the third name on this list though. Huge game for Adonai Mitchell this week. He's pretty much a one-man show on offense for the Jets this week. 12 targets, 8 catches, 102 yards, and his first ever NFL touchdown. And with Adonai Mitchell, it's always been a question of, can he lock in when he's on the field? In all honesty, he's a really talented football player. All of the underlying metrics show that he is consistent getting open. He's consistent at creating separation, but struggles with drops, struggles with letting go of the football before crossing the end zone. Last year, he threw a pick 6 on a flea flicker that eliminated the Colts from playoff contention and then laughed about it after the game when talking to the media. So all in all, just not super locked in. Doesn't seem to really care a ton about being an effective NFL wide receiver, but there's no doubt that he has the talent to be electric if he can figure that out. And while I'd like to see him continue to do it over a couple weeks before plugging Adonai Mitchell into my lineup, he's definitely my favorite of the 3 that I've talked about so far, and I would plug him in next week if I needed a flex play, if I needed a high ceiling option. It feels counterintuitive to say that the Jets would have a high ceiling option at wide receiver that isn't Garrett Wilson, but with Tyrod Taylor at quarterback, absolutely slinging it back there, Adonai Mitchell looking like he might be motivated by a game like this, he's someone that I'm definitely intrigued by and will be looking to pick up off waivers as well. We also have the first Jalen Coker breakout game this year, 4 catches, 74 yards, and a touchdown. Leads the team in targets with 6, and love to see it from Coker. I mean, he's been one of my favorite talents from last year's rookie class. He was a UDFA that came onto the scene for the Panthers later in the year in 2024, and down the stretch, he was looking like a better wide receiver overall than their first round pick in Xavier Legette. And this offseason, I was drafting a ton of Coker. I mean, he was available in the last round in pretty much every draft, and then 2 weeks before the season, we get kicked in the balls. Jalen Coker hits IR. He's out for the first 4 games. And then once he got back, his season has just started super slow. The Panthers have also been really bad. So similar to what I was saying about the Saints, just not a ton of points to be going around past Hetero McMillan in that offense, up until this week at least. So it was great to see Coker come onto the scene and really pop off this week. And given what we know about Coker's talent, he's another guy that I would definitely be looking to add off waivers as well. Also wanted to note Chris Godwin, who's making his first appearance on the risers list this year. We see Godwin play his first healthy allotment of snaps since coming back from that injury this year. year. The Bucs have absolutely been easing him in over the past couple weeks. He's been playing around 30 to 40% of the offensive snaps. This week, Godwin sees a bit of a boost, 66% of routes, which is up from his week 12 route percentage of only 42%. And he looked good out there. He led the team in receiving yards, second only behind Igbokwe in targets. And if Godwin's available on your waivers, I would view him as a priority pickup. I think he plugs right in that mid wide receiver 3 area, especially with Igbokwe drawing that wide receiver 1 coverage right now. I feel like we might see Baker go back to that Godwin safety net that we were seeing early last year. Obviously would temper the expectations. I don't expect him to be the Godwin of last year pre-injury, but definitely feels like a startable wide receiver nonetheless. And then here are the wide receiver fallers in week 13. None of them really stick out to me, so I'm going to skip over these guys, but take a look and pause the video if you want to. All right, and for our next chart, I know what you might be thinking, looks a lot like the original RB risers chart from the beginning of the video. This is slightly different. This is the biggest RB movers over the past month. So the last chart looked at the delta between fantasy points per game from weeks 1 to week 12, and then the difference in that fantasy points per game, including week 13. This one splits it up, looks at the past month of production standing alone against their early season production. So here we have weeks 1 through 9 fantasy points per game. And then we have the biggest risers over the last 4 games specifically. And I'm recording this before Monday Night Football when the Giants are going to be playing the Patriots. So I'll skip over those players. A couple names I did want to highlight here though. Jahmyr Gibbs, even with the dud game on Thanksgiving, he's still the RB1 over the past month, averaging 31.2 fantasy points per game. Absolutely insane production from him, and continuing to view him as a top 3 back down the stretch this year. And quietly, Achane has just continued to have legendary production out of that Miami Dolphins backfield. He's averaging 27.13 fantasy points per game over the past 4 weeks, only behind Jahmyr Gibbs in terms of position ranking. So it's been awesome to see those 2 backs continue to do what they do. They obviously both have a ton of pass catching upside, which continues to be just a major key for running back fantasy success. And then in terms of fallers, the one guy I wanted to highlight here is Josh Jacobs, who we've seen have a massive fall over the past month compared to what he was doing early in the season. He was averaging nearly 20 fantasy points per game over the first 9 weeks, and over the past month, he's been down to just around 12 fantasy points per game, which is good for RB24. And I'm definitely worried about Jacobs' performance down the stretch. He doesn't seem to be fully healthy. Even before he had the injury that held him out for a week, he wasn't looking like the same running back, obviously, that he was earlier in his career. He's definitely starting to reach that age cliff. So taking that into account, along with the fact that he might be injured right now, we also have Marshawn Lloyd set to return in the next week or 2, and I think he could be used as a fresh set of legs in that backfield. So I would definitely temper my expectations for Jacobs going forward, and if your trade deadline is still open, he'd be a guy that I'd be looking to move off before the fantasy playoffs. And then moving down to the biggest wide receiver risers and fallers over the past month, a couple guys I wanted to highlight here in terms of the big names. First being Jameson Williams, who has a massive game on Thanksgiving. We saw Amon-Ra St. Brown leave early with an injury, and once Amon-Ra was out of the game, this offense flowed entirely through JMO. So not only is he the wide receiver 9 over the past month, if we get time with Amon-Ra sidelined over the next week or 2, I'd find it hard to not view JMO as a top 5 wide receiver without Amon-Ra on the field. I also just wanted to call out George Pickens as well real quick. He is the wide receiver 1 overall over the past month. I think it's safe to say at this point that Dallas has 2 wide receiver 1s in CD and Pickens, and that offense just continues to be humming down the stretch. So if you have Pickens, I'm viewing him as a high-end wide receiver 1 as well. He's a guy that cannot be leaving your starting lineup for the remainder of the year. AJ Brown, another guy that's seen a massive rise over the past month. Ever since that Madden clip where he said if you had him in fantasy, just go ahead and drop him, he's now the wide receiver 4 in fantasy over the past 4 weeks. So I hope you didn't take his advice. Hope you kept him on your team because he's looking like he's going to be more reliable than ever down the stretch. Another guy that's not in the same tier as those first 3 that I talked about, but I wanted to highlight Jayden Higgins as well, who's up to wide receiver 22 over the past month. He's emerged as pretty much the clear-cut wide receiver 2 in that Texans offense, continues to see his route percentage rise week over week, and also looks like one of the main red zone targets. So if you have Jayden Higgins, I'd be looking to make him a weekly starter if I could at this point as well. Moving down to the fallers, a couple guys I wanted to highlight here. First being the biggest faller at the wide receiver position, Ricky Pearsall, who's down from 13 fantasy points per game over the first 9 weeks. Obviously, he didn't play all 9 weeks. He was hurt for quite a bit of that, so it's a smaller sample size. But regardless, over the past 4 weeks, he's only at 2.4 fantasy points per game, good for wide receiver 92 overall. He's consistently been behind Kittle, Jennings, and Christian McCaffrey in terms of targets on a weekly basis. And I think at this point, you can drop Pearsall in all redraft formats. Another name that you hate seeing on the fallers list, Justin Jefferson, all the way down here. He's gone down from 15.5 fantasy points per game over the first 9 weeks to now just 7.5 over the past month. The offense as a whole in Minnesota has been as close as impossible to watch as almost any football that I've seen recently. And as good as JJF is, I'm not sure there's a single wide receiver in the league that could overcome this level of QB play right now. I would never recommend benching JJF, but at this point, it's hard to view him as anything more than a back-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 on a weekly basis. And down here at the bottom, we have Puka falling from 23 fantasy points per game over the first 9 weeks, starting the year super hot. He's down to 15.9 over the past month. Still wide receiver 14 over the past 4 weeks, so more of a back-end wide receiver 1, which is a bit disappointing considering he was looking like the clear-cut favorite to be the wide receiver 1 overall. Obviously still starting Puka every week, but I am limiting my expectations a little bit given what we've seen over the past 4 weeks. And then finishing off here with the biggest movers at the tight end position, I skipped the week 13 specific tight ends chart just because there were no real names that I wanted to note there, but a couple guys I wanted to call out here. First being Colby Parkinson, who's now up to 11 fantasy points per game over the past 4 games. Good for tight end 10 overall over that time period. And outside of Devontae and Puka, it's looking like Colby Parkinson is that third option for Matt Stafford in terms of a reliable target. He had 5 targets this week, which matched Devontae and was only behind Puka. And while it feels like the Rams are prone to changing the way they roll out their tight ends on a weekly basis, they have Davis Allen, Tyler Higbee, and Terrence Ferguson that they also like to get in there. All the signs are pointing to Colby Parkinson being that number 1 passing option in terms of the tight ends for Matt Stafford. Also wanted to note Gunnar Helm, who's now up to 8.7 fantasy points per game over the past 4 weeks. Not a guy that I would be looking to pick up in redraft leagues right now, but I know he's going to be one of my main dynasty targets this offseason. This week he led the team in targets with 7, and he's got everything going for him that we're looking for in promising young tight ends that are posed to break out in future seasons. All the underlying metrics look super good for Gunnar Helm. He's one of the highest rated receivers overall by PFF right now, including wide receivers and tight ends, and he's clearly one of Cam Ward's favorite targets. So if you're in any dynasty leagues, he's definitely someone that I'd be looking to send out offers for this offseason, and a name to keep in mind for next redraft season as a deep sleeper at the tight end position. And I'm realizing I left my camera over the risers there, but you can see here the numbers I was just referring to for those guys. Moving over to the fallers, only a couple guys I wanted to talk about here, but the top 2 fallers at the position, Dallas Goedert and Oronde Gadsden. Starting off with Goedert, he was one of the hottest tight ends to start the season, 14.4 fantasy points per game over the first 9 weeks. He's down to just around 5.3 over the past month, and it's to the point where I don't view Goedert as anything more than a touchdown dependent back-end tight end 1. I would definitely be looking to find other options at the tight end position going into the fantasy playoffs. And then with Gadsden, it's a little bit different. I mean, his production obviously has not been up to par over the past month either. All of Gadsden's underlying metrics still looks super promising for a rookie tight end. And even though the production hasn't been there over the past month, unless I had another locked and loaded top 6 tight end, I'd find it pretty hard to take Gadsden out of my weekly lineup. All right, that's all I got for you guys for the week 13 data-driven takeaways. Make sure to drop a comment below. Let me know what other information you'd like to see over the next couple weeks going into your fantasy playoffs. And if you like this content, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, help us continue to grow. So I'll see you in week 14 with another video. Until then, have a good one. Peace.